Now let's spend a few minutes talking about construction and demolition waste. Construction and demolition waste also has its own supply chain, right? So as you can see here, there's a building, okay? That building is coming down, it is being demolished, and so yeah, so you can see it being demolished here. All of this, and you have all of this rubble. So you have the rubble is brought to a collection point, right? So the rubble from various construction sites, etc., and then it is taken to a recycling plant. Okay, from the recycling plant, these things are crushed and processed, dried, whatever, and finally, become some kind of building material, right? Could be stone, aggregate, whatever it is. These building materials are then taken back to a construction site to build, right? So this is also a supply chain, right? But it's an interesting supply chain because it's a circular supply chain. You started from the building and you ended up at the building, so it's a bit of a circular supply chain, but it's a supply chain nonetheless. All the issues that I talked about are important here, right? How will you manage the bullwhip effect in C&D supply chains? Important question. How will you manage vendors? How will you ensure that this recycling plant is functioning at optimal capacity? What will your transportation and distribution strategy be? And what will happen once the building reaches the end of its life, right? So all of these are very important questions that you will have to answer, okay, for construction. These are problems that we have to solve, okay. Now, what happens if the supply chain is not robust? Now, this is very important because construction and demolition waste is a new concept. So, the construction and demolition waste supply chain is really very immature today, right? In many cases, the parts of the demolished building don't even make it to collection point. They go straight to landfill, okay. The recycling plants today are not necessarily very efficient. There is not much demand for C&D waste, and so your logistics are also very inefficient. Yes, you have a factory that produces, a plant that produces some building material. What do I do with it, right? How do I get it? So it's not a very efficient supply chain. So what happens because of that is today it takes a long time to receive C&D waste based building materials, and it probably costs a little bit more. In many places, people have told us it's cheaper for me to buy new aggregate, right, rather than buy recycled aggregate. Why is that so? Because the supply chain is new and immature. Okay, so at IIT Madras, we recently built something called used a technology called glass fiber reinforced buildings, GFRG, right? And we use GFRG to build a building on campus. GFRG is this glass fiber reinforced gypsum, comes in the form of panels. So you get a bunch of prefabricated panels that come, and of course the foundation is a regular foundation, but then you use the you erect the panels. Of course you put some reinforcement and grouting in between the panels, but then you connect them and you get your building, right? So we actually built a G+1 building in 27 days or 28 days or something like that, right? Very, very quickly because it was prefabricated, okay? Now, when we look around and see, okay, you guys have demonstrated that you've built a building in 27 days, why isn't everyone using it, right? Why don't we have so much low income housing to build? Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana, you look at the data tells you that we should have built, we're well behind in terms of what we need to build. So why don't we use this kind of technology and build faster, right? The reason that did not happen is because of the immaturity of the supply chain, okay. First of all, there were very, very few suppliers. In fact, at one point there was only one supplier, right? Now, when you have one supplier, it's always a problem, because if that person is not supplying properly, you have nobody else to go to, right? So they become what we call a monopoly, okay. They raise the prices, they lower the efficiency, right? So this was a supplier, and his factory also was not going at 100% efficiency, as a result of which the supply of materials was very slow, okay. You also need, for many of these, you need trained manpower, right? In this case, you need people who understood this technology to be able to erect it on site. A general mason or a general laborer who's used to pouring concrete would not necessarily be able to do this. Similarly, in a C&D waste recycling facility, you need some specialized labor, right? In immature supply chains, those labor are not available, or they're available in small numbers and they therefore charge much higher rates, right? So it's difficult to get them, and the overall product tends to be far more expensive, okay. Third challenge, nobody likes to adopt innovation, okay. People like tried and tested things. So when we went and told a lot of people, hey, you will get a house in 27 days, they looked at us and said, oh no, this seems to be some panel it is not very strong, right? We want reinforced concrete, we want brick, we want to be able to knock on it and get that comfort that this is a solid structure. Now, nothing structurally wrong with GFRG, just like we know that there is nothing structurally wrong with a C&D based building material, whether it's an aggregate or whatever. But there is a shortage of demand, right? And because of the shortage of demand, there is a shortage of supply, right? And you can see this bullwhip effect, picking up. So there are no what we call economies of scale, right? People are producing in low amounts, so costs tend to be high. Because this is still a low volume business, there is not enough trained manpower, and because there is not enough of these examples, people are reluctant to adopt this. Okay, so because of these reasons, you see that this glass fiber reinforced gypsum technology, although it is robust and although it has been tried out successfully in multiple areas, has still not caught on. Construction and demolition waste is in the same boat, right? It's in the same boat because we still don't have enough demand. We also don't have enough supply. And because of this, the sector isn't quite taking off. It's a vicious cycle, right? If I don't have more demand, why will I have more supply, right? If I don't have more supply, costs will go up and there will be lesser demand, right? So you see this vicious cycle. So how do you break out of this cycle? One important measure is policy. Okay, and we have seen this being successful in several sectors, right? At the top, a policy is enacted which, for instance, says that so much of recycled C&D material must be used in a building, or there is a policy that says if you use so much C&D waste in a building, then you get this incentive, right? You get this tax incentive or whatever it is. There is an incentive, there is a policy that incentivizes the use of C&D. Naturally, demand will pick up. If demand picks up, there will be a business opportunity, and therefore supply will pick up. More entrepreneurs will come up who may set up construction and demolition waste plants, might start improving the efficiency of the distribution and lowering the prices at which they supply materials. And also, if there is competition, right, that is also a wonderful way in which you lower prices. So if there's a lot of demand and you have 2 or 3 of these suppliers, then each of them are competing with each other and lowering prices, right? For instance, we saw this in the telecom sector, right? A number of firms providing telecommunication services, Airtel, Jio, Vodafone, whatever. And because there is competition, prices have come down. So you and I, it's very easy for us to get a phone plan, right? Whatever plan you want is very cheap, right? Because competition has brought down the prices. Okay, so policy is going to be an important lever in terms of mainstreaming C&D supply chains. Today, you don't see as much C&D being used on construction sites because of the supply chain, right? And if through policy we can incentivize the use of C&D, the supply chain will become far more robust and it will be far easier to use construction and demolition waste, right? So this is one of the learnings hopefully that you take out of this session. Okay, so in order to use C&D waste, it is also important that you understand the economics, right? Because the economics are what drive costs, and ultimately, right? Ultimately, even though most of us tend to be engineers, cost is what drives decision making, right? So if you look at a C&D supply chain, right, or a C&D, the person who manufactures those building blocks, building materials, aggregates, whatever, what are their costs, right? On the one hand, they have capital costs, right? They need to buy some land, they need to set up a factory that manufactures, right? You take raw materials and you manufacture. So there are some capital costs, right, which to set up that factory and that land. Then they have to buy the raw material. Okay, so the raw material needs to be supplied and there are some costs associated with that. Okay, then they have to actually manufacture, for which they need electricity, they need water, they need manpower, etc. Right? So those are operating expenses, right? Then I'll just stop scale for a second. Then they have to actually then send it to somebody else. Then they'll have to send it to somebody else. So they have logistical costs. Okay, so these are all the costs that go in. Okay, capital costs, raw material supply cost, operating cost, logistic costs. Capital costs could be reduced perhaps through favorable policy that says if you're going to develop a C&D system, then maybe I'll supply, you have to pay less tax on the land because you're actually doing something that promotes the environment. Raw material supply costs will come down if more and more people start demanding this. More and more people, more and more buildings are demolished and the demolition supply chain starts becoming far more efficient. So the moment we start scaling, we get more and more people we start finding that we reduce the raw material supply costs. As you start building expertise, your operations become more and more lean. As there is more demand, your operations become more and more lean. So in some sense, the demand will help reduce operating expenses. Okay, and if there is also high demand, your logistic costs might also come up, because there will be a lot of sites in the vicinity that will require this. You need not necessarily transport large distances. Okay, so the economics of supply chains are critical to their being adopted. If supply chains can organize themselves so that they produce something at low cost, people will readily buy. Today, the C&D waste supply chain is, for reasons I have just mentioned, not that optimal, right? There is, manufacturing capability is low, logistical costs are high, demand is low, and so the overall costs are high and people are not necessarily buying it. But as these chains develop, as they become more and more mature, like for instance the cement supply chain, right, costs will come down and people will buy it readily. And in some sense, policy which is enacted by government, or policy that can be enacted by large developers saying I will only use C&D waste, can catalyze this shift in supply chains, right? And that is going to be very critical. Okay, so a big moral of today's session is that supply chains are critical to the functioning of any business. Construction and demolition waste supply chains exist but are not efficient, and if these can become more efficient, there will be further adoption of construction and demolition waste. In order for them to become more efficient, they need to tackle the bullwhip effect, manage their vendors better, improve the efficiency of their manufacturing processes, improve the efficiency of their logistics, and work on the circularity of the supply chain, right? And by doing all of these, it's definitely very, very possible that through policy intervention, through improvements that organizations make, that in the years to come we'll see a very well functional supply chain. But the point is, it won't happen automatically. There needs to be some kind of a policy push for this to happen, and then you'll see a lot more use of C&D waste in the actual construction sector. Today the actual use is minuscule. So although there is a lot of discussion, a lot of science and technology development that has been done, the actual utilization is minuscule, and hopefully through some of these ideas this will pick up. Okay, so this is just a map that I took from a thesis that a student of ours had recently published. His name is Ram, where he looks at, look at the number of waste collection points in a city like Chennai, right? The logistics of going to each site, collecting the waste, bringing it, I mean, it's extremely challenging, right? And so this is one of the reasons why this has not yet picked up, but over a period of time people will figure out, hubs and spokes and how to actually collect and transfer waste. Okay, then you have things that are dumped, you have to segregate it, right? So you got to make sure that the reusable construction demolition waste actually comes, whereas all the other debris, maybe other kinds of waste are put away. So segregation again is a challenge. So if there is enough volume of people demanding this, then it makes sense to invest in all of these processes, logistics, segregation, etc. Right? But unless we can spur demand, the supply chain will stay immature. And we can spur demand, and it's chicken and an egg, right? Today the costs are high, so there is no demand. And because there is no demand, the costs remain high. And that's where policy, I think, becomes a very, very critical tool, right? If policy can mandate or incentivize greater use of C&D waste, increase the demand for C&D waste, the supply chain will become more efficient and costs will tend to come down. Okay. Yeah, so this is just a picture of a C&D waste recycling plant. Okay. And maybe one last thought before we conclude, because we are now at the end of this session, is that the construction supply chains, unlike other supply chains, are very fragmented. There are several people who come together, right, to build a construction supply chain. Everywhere there is a fragmented supply chain, but the construction industry tends to have more linkages than elsewhere. And therefore, these kinds of supply chains are often innovation retarders, right? So innovation does not happen, very, very quickly. So for instance, this is work that a former colleague of mine, John Taylor, did for his PhD, where, a firm in Finland came up with a software technology, right, to improve the construction supply chain, right? This software was something, this building modeler was something that helped with design and detailing. Okay, in Finland, design and detailing was done by a single function, whereas in the US, design was done by someone, detailing and fabrication was done elsewhere. And I think this is the case in India as well. So because of the different kinds of supply chains and the different kinds of fragmentation, this technology diffused in Finland because it matched the supply chain, but did not diffuse in the United States, where it did not match the supply chain, right? So the US supply chain in this case did not adopt that innovation. And we see this in several parts of the world, where because of the fragmentation of construction supply chains, an innovation comes in, but the innovation doesn't cleanly fit the supply chain, right? Or people start questioning, saying, okay, in the next project, I'll work with a different group of people, right? What is the point of adopting this innovation in this project, where in the next project, I'll go back to business as usual? So construction supply chains tend to retard innovation a little bit. And one of the ways of solving that is to start looking at more integrated supply chains, where you don't have so many pieces. You have, for instance, we talk about design and build contracts, where designers and contractors come together as an integrated system. So we'll have to look at also integrating our construction supply chains to promote the adoption of things like construction and demolition waste. Okay. So integration. So in order to, so the mantra for supply chain management is, I want to have more integrated supply chains, right? So it's easier to pass information, materials and finance back and forth, and more coordinated supply chains, maybe through the use of IT and so on, where instantly, if there is a change in demand or whatever, every part of the supply chain understands it, right? And they are able to respond to it very quickly through better logistics, through better handling of the bullwhip effect and so on, right? Process orientation, advanced planning, etc. Okay. So integration and coordination need to be very critical. So again, if we want to make construction and demolition waste use a reality, we have to fix the supply chain, right? Partly you fix that through policy that creates demand, but also you need to ensure that the supply chain is better integrated and well coordinated through the use of digital solutions. All kinds of people can play a role here. There will be people who will manage the supply chain, like cement manufacturers. You will actually have C&D waste manufacturers. You have large clients who can push changes in the supply chain. You have governments that can enact policy. You have technologists that can bring, and academics that can highlight these ideas so that practitioners can play a role. So all of us have a role to play. But fundamentally, if you don't have a functional supply chain, the use of construction and demolition waste will continue to be small scale and largely academic. And we really need to solve the supply chain problem in this area. Okay. So with that, we've come to the end of this talk. I hope it was interesting, probably something a little bit new, or a topic that many of you may not automatically be familiar with. But please take away the notion that construction demolition waste reuse is extremely important for the environment. We are running out of material. We need to reuse as much as possible. But despite all of us knowing that, it does not happen because the costs are too high, the trust is too low, and essentially all of that is because the supply chain is not yet mature, right? And so we have to work towards a much more mature supply chain. Like I said, all of us have a role to play. And in this lecture, I've tried to cover what are some of the challenges that supply chains face, what are some of the problems you have when you have an immature supply chain, and what could you possibly do to leapfrog to a more mature supply chain. Okay. So thank you very much, and all the very best to all of you.